Hi everybody! I was hoping to do my chart readings today, but it really didn't work out like that. So what I'm going to try and do is put the actual charts up on my blog. And so when I do get a chance to do a live with the readings for the various pandemics and epidemics that have happened, going back to the bubonic plague over 200 years ago, you'll be able to refer to them while I'm chatting. And I'm sure a lot of you who follow the astrology really closely will like that. There's just so much to talk about what's going on today. France having a total shutdown, Spain turning planes back, closing all bars, pubs, shutting down all gatherings. I think Israel have banned even gatherings with 10 people. It's just amazing. But one of the most crazy things I heard is Boris Johnson, who is now, well, it was actually Robert Peston. You can check out on Twitter, and it's an ITV story. They were talking about in between 5 and 20 days' time, they're going to make a law that 70-year-olds may not leave their home for 4 months. And so really, it sounds crazy. It even says no visitors. So I don't know how that's going to work, bearing in mind, I know at least 3 over 70-year-olds who are still working in a professional capacity, running businesses. So I'm not quite sure how that would work. Also, lots of 70-year-olds help with the grandchildren, fetching and carrying, things like that. They may live in households where there's still younger children and grandchildren. So it's rather shocking, very surprising, and you kind of think, what the hell is going on? So the reason why the UK is taking this approach, apparently, is because their strategy in this whole thing is to increase herd mentality. Not herd mentality, but I guess that does apply partially. The kind of theory with the UK government is that they want to increase the herd immunity. So they really want the younger people, the healthier people, to go about their daily lives, build up immunity, and during that phase they want all the 70-year-olds and the more vulnerable to stay right away, take themselves out the picture almost, so that the rest of people develop an immunity, and that they think is the best way of actually tackling this. But bearing in mind the UK is the only country taking that response at the moment, it means that what would happen with international travel? Well, you have more and more countries closing their borders. But just to get back to the over 70s thing, I mean, yes, there's the herd mentality and all that, but the question mark is, does this particular coronavirus work that way? Do you develop an immunity, or when you, because it's been said that part of the antibodies that you develop for the COVID-19 in your blood can actually facilitate getting it again. Loads of scientists are saying it's a zombie virus that comes back year after year, and definitely like the regular virus where people go and get vaccines, you have to have the vaccine every year because it's a different strain. So I'm not quite sure if that herd mentality is scientifically viable or absolutely thought through. The other thing that I'm thinking about this is, remember when I talked about Saturn-Pluto conjunction and how Saturn, Pluto and Capricorn represent older people? Well, we've also talked on this channel about what I called euthanasia, but not spelt in the normal way, spelt like youth, Y-O-U-T-H, and how this in the chart and in the stars kind of encapsulates the battle between the old and the young. And it seems here this is really dramatically the case when you hear of how respirators are being taken away from older people who are basically left to die, particularly in Italy where there's such a shortage, and given to younger people. Now, I did have a message from one of our subscribers on the channel, and he was telling me that in Italy even over 40s are having respirators taken away from them. So you can see here and how it's euthanasia in action, the young being favored, survival of the fittest. And yeah, of course, I mean, obviously, multiple agendas being served is the title of this podcast. And one agenda is reducing the pensions problem. Because we know that in the big cities like Illinois, for example, Detroit, they have nothing in their pension pot. It's dry, and I think it's very much the same around the whole of Europe. I think they've long wondered what they were going to do when all the baby boomers became pensioned off. Yes, they were all very productive and have contributed, but now the state, the elite, see it as a burden. But you must remember, a lot of American Congress are very, very old as well. A lot of our MPs are old. Politicians tend to be much older, which is why we see so many of them coming down with this virus. So, there you go. Multiple things to think about there. So, does herd immunity develop? And will that help slow the virus? And how are people going to really cope socially with all the 70-year-olds not being able to leave their homes? How would it even be enforced? I think that's a problem as well. I can see a lot of people that I know would not be heeding that advice, especially, I mean, if you're just over 70. I mean, a lot of people over 70 don't necessarily look it, do they? So how would you enforce it, bearing in mind we don't walk around in the UK with IDs, just for our American listeners, so it's not that easy. We're not encouraged to carry our driver's license even, so you can't check that easily. Obviously, I suppose your neighbours could grass on you if they wanted to. Now, what I'm beginning to be worried about is a breakdown in law and order, more civil disobedience, and I'm particularly thinking about looting. Now, Justin King, who used to be the CEO of Sainsbury's, which if you're watching in the US is a very big, like Walmart kind of thing, or Target, he's now the non-executive director at Marks & Spencer. And he was saying that there's going to be a huge supply chain problem with lots of people off work in the supply chain, disruption because of problems of importing, because of all the shutdowns in Spain and all the other countries, in France, and he sees empty shelves. So I'm wondering, bearing that in mind, I can see it now becoming increasingly difficult for all of us to get our groceries. You know, even now they're stopping online people from registering. If you're not already registered with, say, Tesco or Waitrose or something, you can't register for online shopping. Not necessarily at those stores. I'm not sure which stores, but I mean, you could see it coming everywhere. And even when you do order online, the delivery date is way in the future, and there's no guarantee that you're going to get any of the things that you have actually ordered because of these supply chain disruptions. So it's very interesting to see what's going to be happening there. But do notice, this is especially a point for the Brexiteers, how countries are closing borders. I think Poland have closed their borders. They're not allowing anybody in. Denmark has done it. Israel have done it. But a lot of European countries are closing their borders. So for all those people who thought, oh, borders are passé, they're bigoted, they're old-fashioned, they don't belong in the new world order, you know, globalization, we're getting rid of borders, everyone must be free to go where they want. You see how they have resorted back to the old fail-safe of borders? You just have to have a border. It's the essential firebreak in these times, whether you're protecting yourself from disease or rebellions breaking out in other countries. Borders are not old-fashioned. They were, well, to use a rather childish term, they were invented for a reason. They've lasted all this long for a reason, and you can see now countries are resorting to them despite all their Schengen and all their openness. When push comes to shove, borders deliver. And as another subscriber pointed out to me very kindly, thank you to Paul, he said this whole thing has shown up how European countries don't actually work together. In fact, Italy has been hung out to dry by all the other EU nations. Italy has relied on support from China, and China actually sent a huge batch of masks over to Italy, but these landed up in a warehouse in Germany. Germany held on to them for ages, making all sorts of excuses about export restrictions and whatever. And when Italy finally got through all the bureaucracy and red tape to get those masks, they were gone. They've disappeared. So you see, it's each for their own. Nationalism is alive and well. When it comes to it, the Germans are going to look at after the German people at the expense of other countries. So all this nonsense about, oh, let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya because we're all working together like a happy family in the European Union, you can see that when a crisis hits, it's a nonsense. It doesn't work. Everyone reverts back to type and acts with their national interest in mind. So another thing that was pointed out, it's being done in Israel and it's being done in South Korea. The way they are enforcing lockdowns, quarantines, bans, and making sure that people don't have mass gatherings is by using drones to kind of spy on people. And I think this might be a new level of surveillance we're moving towards. Again, this is the theme of multiple agendas being served, because looking forward to, well, not looking forward as in I'm not looking forward to it, but just looking into the future with all this climate stuff, maybe they're going to use drones to monitor our activities. Are we being green enough? Are we using unnecessary fuel? So you can see that the surveillance state is being rolled out, and however this started, whether it's big, small, whether a virus is as big as they make out or not, multiple agendas are being served, and there's another example of one of them. If you guys go and look up Disease X, there's a Forbes article. There's also an article in The Sun. They both say the similar thing. Back in early 2018, the UN and the various powers that be were discussing the possible outbreak of a disease X and speaking about all the things that they would need to roll into action in order to combat it. So it seems that this has either been long in the planning phase, or they've certainly, the powers that be, have anticipated it for whatever reason, and they're certainly making hay while the sun shines for all their agendas. I'm also having a thought that one of the major impacted industries is tourism and travel. We have many airlines that might go out of business. I saw a lot of people on Twitter were very angry at the notion of Richard Branson lobbying government for a huge bailout for the airline industry, because people say, first of all, he's not a tax-paying citizen. He sued the NHS for $2.5 million. So is he the right person to now be asking for a bailout from the taxpayers? But anyhow, the airline industry, Norway is in big trouble. I mean, you don't have to be a genius to look around the world and see that both travel companies, tour companies, airlines, cruises, hotels are going to be hit severely. So what happens now if a lot of airlines go out of business, for example? It means in the future only the big ones survive, which means less competition, which means much higher fares. And what does that mean? Less people can fly. So that is the climate agenda achieved. So I think this whole lockdown of the economy will drive a lot of people into bankruptcy, which means huge amounts of people will have less disposable income to travel and make car journeys even, and less money. Obviously they're going to have to pay more because prices will go up. So therefore the climate agenda are achieving their goal of shutting people down from travel. I also think that just in the same way they create panic and force quarantines, I can foresee in the future something like, say, the city of Birmingham. They might say, the city of Birmingham has not reached its carbon target for the month of April, and as a result we are going to have to quarantine the whole city to reduce movement so that we can reach that carbon total, because it's so vitally important to the planet. You can just imagine that happening. So I think this is a rollout of quarantining restrictions, mass gathering restrictions, which is also very handy because people can't protest, and whenever people can't meet in large groups, it stops political activity, especially grassroots political activity, and it consolidates power for the elites, which is what we were talking about. So I don't know if any of you other guys saw a very irritating and childish meme going around on Twitter and Facebook. It goes along the lines of, Bob doesn't panic. Bob washes his hands because he's not a dirty so-and-so. Bob listens to the government. Bob listens to experts. Be like Bob. I mean, come on. Ugh, that really has to be the most unimaginative meme. But isn't that the mentality they're trying to put on people? And my answer to that is government has several objectives. One is to keep the economy going. Another is to stay in power. Another is to stop mass panic and civil disobedience. And a third is to stop deaths. I mean, it's probably priorities in that order. Therefore, the government's decisions will be based on those priorities, not you individually and your health. And therefore, you can't just sit around hoping that governments and experts will think about you. You have to make the choice for yourself. And I can remember an expert on Mike Graham's show in January. And he said, this is just a Chinese thing. It'll fizzle out. No one need worry at all. It's nothing, guys, Calm down. And I think, how wrong was he? So which experts do we actually listen to? Because some experts are quite alarmist. Some experts are poo-pooing it and acting like washing your hands makes the troubles of the world go away. Maybe we'll wash our hands and it'll keep ISIS at bay as well. That's what it seems like. When we're talking about an airborne virus, who knows? And I think washing your hands doesn't really help you if you've touched your phone, you've touched your hair, you've touched your handbag. You wash your hands and you go back and touch those things right away. So it really is a broad approach to hygiene, but you've also got to shore up your immune, do your social distancing, and make decisions for yourself and for your family. And if they tell you and drum it into you, don't panic buy, well, by all means, don't be selfish. But if you feel you're in a risk category and you may be stuck at home for a long time, it's very sensible to stock up, and you shouldn't be made to feel guilty for that. Another thing that came out today, which I thought was well worth mentioning, is that half of French and half of Dutch patients in ICU at the moment are under 50. So don't be fooled when they tell you this is only a disease for older people, right? Because there are lots of people that are slightly younger than 50, or I don't know, we don't know the total breakdown, but half people in ICU in France and did I say Dutch? Yeah, in Holland are under 50. But like Julia Hartley-Brewer pointed out on Twitter, she said the real reason the over 70s and over 80s are dying is not because they're so vulnerable necessarily. It's because they're taking respirators away from those people to give them to the younger people. So she said the real reason is more sinister. So just bear that in mind. And yeah, like I say, think about the numbers. The 50% of patients in French and Dutch ICU are under 50. It also seems that it affects various countries a little bit differently, but like I say, arm yourself with lots of information and don't be bullied about taking the action that you personally feel is right for you. So guys, everyone stay healthy, stay fit, please stay safe and make sensible decisions that are right for you. Don't worry what Bob says. In fact, you can tell him to off. Just a little PS at the end of this broadcast. Do you remember that in World War II they cracked the Enigma code? They knew that Coventry, which is, for you guys listening in America, is a rather large British city, was going to be bombed. And they let it go ahead because they thought the greater good would be served if Germany didn't know that they'd cracked the code. And if they evacuated Coventry, Germany would know they cracked the code. And therefore it shows you governments make decisions based on the greater good of everybody, not on individuals. So always remember that particular example and just be concerned that you may be the collateral damage.